The lords of Rohan stand tall, defiant in the face of hill tribe swarms, generals with vendettas, and huge wall-smashing oliphants. Hey guys, welcome back to Planet Mithril. My name is Mithril, and today I have for you my take on the new plastic hero from the Rohan box, Haleth, Prince of Rohan. A truly beautiful model in plastic which can be built a variety of ways, spear, sword or axe as is seen on screen with. I've opted to build my Haleth with a spear as for me that just feels a little bit more Rohan. I've decided to paint my foot Haleth without his helmet so I can really show off the intricate detail of his face, his hair and show you that awesome skin fade he's rocking. I'll also be going step by step over the bulk of the horse at the end of the video as it's a really unique scheme and there's a lot of awesome looking detail over the horse tabard. However, smaller details like the straps and the hooves and the like, I'll be covering very briefly in the 360, but covering more in detail and in depth when it comes to my How to Paint Middle-earth Horses tutorial, which will be dropping very soon. I will, as always, be working off a black undercoat applied with Citadel Chaos Black Spray. I hope you guys are ready for a lengthy holiday to the Kingdom of Rohan. I know I am, guys. Brushes ready? Let's get painting. I'm starting by base coating Haleth's face and hands with a 1-to-1 mix of Bugman's Glow and Cadian Flesh Tone. His hair I'm base coating using Steel Legion Drab, slightly darker than Xandri Dust I've used on other warrior models recently. Haleth's cloak I'm now base coating with a 3-to-1 mix of Warg Flesh and Caliban Green, making sure to get this in all the material folds for a smooth finish. All the armour, chestplate, chainmail, pauldrons etc. I'm base coating using lead belcher. Don't worry about bleeding onto the horse filigree over the top, there's a reason I'm not painting this just yet. The inner areas of the braces, greaves, his feet and any material around his calves and legs I'm base coating with a 1-to-1 mix of Mechanica Standard Grey and Abaddon Black. The bulk of his leather armour now, including the folds and intricate horse filigree over the chestplate and various limb guards, I'm now carefully base coating using Thondia Brown. The spear shaft is getting a base coat using Dryad Bark. The hilt of the sword and the fastenings of the cloak I'm base coating using Balthazar Gold. There will be other gold details later, but this is all you need to catch for now. Finally, his belt and the hand grip of the sword I'm picking out with a 3-to-1 mix of Corn Red and Rhinox Hide. All the skin is getting an initial shade using a diluted mix of 1 part Reichland Flesh Shade to 1 part Lamian Medium. This will be the consistency of most of my shades during this tutorial. When this is dry, I'm going to start building up the shape and tone of his facial features using pure Cadian flesh tone. At this stage too, I'm separating out the fingers, leaving the shade in the recesses. I'm layering up the skin tone now by adding small amounts of Kislev flesh to the Cadian flesh tone at a rough 3:1 ratio to begin with, further defining his rather pristine features, shaping his expression and creating tension over the fingers. Continuing to add more Kislev flesh in the mix until I'm at a 3:1 mix in favour of the Kislev flesh. I'm bringing Haleth's tone up lighter than normal to represent his princely splendour. His features are very well defined and he has cheekbones for days, so this takes the upper level highlights really well. Now I'm happy with how Haleth's skin tone is looking. I'm applying a heavily diluted glaze using Carabao Crimson to all the skin. This will tile the layers together and bring a subtle warmth back to his skin. The eye recesses I'm picking up using Abaddon Black, and finishing as per usual with Pallid Witch Flesh. I think Haleth is the first character or model, or at least model I've painted, who is rocking an awesome skin fade. And as such, I think it's the first time I get to indulge in two separate methods to paint the hair to recreate this iconic look from the film. To begin with, Haleth's hair is being given a shade using Agrak Surf Shade, working this into all the recessed grooves. Also, he has no beard. Isn't that illegal in Rohan? I'm building up the tone of that characteristic Rohirrim hair with a 1:1 mix of Steel Legion Drab and Zemesi Desert. This brings a little more vibrancy to the yellowy blonde tones of his hair, which I can build off for the later highlight stages. I'm stippling this onto the skin fade sections of his hair to subtly start creating that shave look. I'm going to be building up the upper tones of Haleth's hair now, starting with a rough 4:1 mix of the previous layer and Pallid Witch Flesh. This will naturally raise the tone of the yellows and prevent it from becoming too stark and bright on the tabletop. My Rohirrim hair recipe isn't too complex, but I do feel gives the best authentic look to the brave people of Rohan. Following the flow and defined lines of the hair by continuing to add more Pallid Witch Flesh into the previous mix, finishing at a rough 3:2 ratio to avoid it becoming too desaturated. You can see I'm focusing this over the crest and curves of Haleth's head, trying to create natural movement. The skin fade sections I've continued to stipple up carefully to bring up these sections uniformly in tone to the rest of the hair. When you're happy with the look and feel of Haleth's princely mane, apply a glaze using heavily diluted Cassandora yellow. This will bounce off the underlying yellow tones and finish off the hair really nicely. The cloak is being shaded with a diluted wash of Athonian Camo Shade, breaking up any pooling as to not to spoil the chic surface of the material. I'm building up the cloak now by adding a small amount of Zemesi Desert into the original base coat mix, raising the tone and strengthening the hue of the grains. I'm blocking out the folds and larger flatter areas of cloth here, ready for my highlights. I'm starting my highlights by adding small amounts of Pallid Witch Flesh into the previous mix, A slightly complex mix, but one that really captures the look and feel of those characteristic cloaks from the men of Rohan. My mix at this stage is a rough 4-to-1 split in favour of the layering mix. The next few highlight stages are as simple as continuing to add pallid witch flesh into the mix as you build up the upper highlights, focusing on the flow of material and where the most prominent crests and curves are in relation to your light source. I didn't go too hard with my pallid witch flesh additions, but you can add as much or as little as you want to get the look you want. Finally, I'm happy with my finished cloak. I'm applying a glaze using heavily diluted BL tan green to tie everything else together. The heroes of Rohan have a tendency to have really intricate, detailed and interesting armour. Theoden, Armour, Theodred, and Haleth is no exception. This does mean, however, they can be quite daunting to paint and paint well. Hopefully, the next few steps will have taken the sting out of that challenge for you for Haleth. I'm starting off by shading all the armour, including the brown trims and leathers, with a diluted wash of Nuln Oil. Again, trying to minimise pooling where I can over these large flatter surfaces. All the silvers now I'm carefully framing and edge highlighting using Ironbreaker. I'm not worried too much about the interim layers here. All I want is to make sure the silvers stand out alongside the richer, more muted brown filigree surrounding them. As with the metalwork, the brown trim and horse filigree is being layered using a 2-to-1 mix of Thondia brown and Tarak stone. I'm looking here just to lift all the trim and patterning as well as block out the panels of the fold hanging down his waist. With this layer now in place and lifted alongside the silvers, I'm going to start the slightly more laborious job of edge highlighting all the patterning and the fold, using a 3-to-1 mix of the previous layer mix and Screaming Skull. The key here is precision. I want this to be as sharp and tight as I can over the next few stages to really give it a unique look befitting the ludicrously detailed armour of the Lords of Rohan. Going over a few more times, adding more Screaming Skull into the mix and applying as another extreme edge highlight. Again, you can add as much or as little as you wish depending on how bright you want this patterning to be. The final stage is to glaze all the brown now with a heavily diluted Cassandra yellow to bring a little bit of warmth and richness back to the browns and leathers. The grey inner areas of the greaves, braces, and then the other areas you've picked out with the base coat grey mix are being shaded using non-oil. Framing the outside that is now with a layer using Eshin grey. Followed by another extreme edge highlight using Administratum grey. This way it complements and matches the look of the rest of the armour. Any other leather details, as well as the wood grain freehand on the spear shaft, I'm painting in now using Gawthor brown. The edges of Haleth's belt and the grip of the sword I'm layering over now using Wazdaka red. Followed by an extreme edge highlight using a mix of Wazdaka red and Evil Sun Scarlet. Don't take this too bright, as it will stand out too much against the rest of the model if you do, rather than serving as a really wonderful spot colour as it currently does. Any extra gold details I'm carefully picking out using Balthazar gold once again. All the golds I'm giving a targeted shade using Druchii violet. Followed by a second shade using Agrak Surfshade. Layering these up now using Fulgurite Copper. And finally, extreme edge highlighting with a 1-to-1 mix of Fulgurite Copper and Pallid Witch Flesh. Finally, the cloak fastenings I'm picking out with a quick coat of Xantri dust. Now, I don't usually go through all the details of horses that much anymore. It tends to make the videos too long, and I've painted horses in other videos, and I'm still planning on getting out my how to paint horses tutorial as soon as I possibly can. It's taking a little while to get sorted, but it's coming, I promise. With Haleth though, I've kind of made a bit of an exception, as his horse has got a very unique coloration, and the dressing over its back is something else that I feel needs to be covered, because it's very intricate and very well detailed. I haven't covered smaller details like straps, hoof, etc, as these are explained in other videos on the channel and will be covered in the aforementioned horse tutorial when that does drop. With that covered, let's start. The entire horse is getting a solid base coat using a 3-to-1 mix of XV88 and Dryad bark. The Dryad here just tones down the vibrancy of the XV88 a little bit, giving me more manoeuvrability when it comes to layers and highlights. With my solid base coat in place, the horse is getting a shade using diluted Reikland Flesh shade, moving this into all the recessed musculature. The next step is to layer over the horse's body again, this time with a rough 3:1 mix of the base coat mix and Zemesi Desert. Again, focusing on building up the shape and tone of the horse body, layering over the larger areas of muscle and tendon, leaving the shade showing in the recesses. The initial highlights I'm building up now by adding Screaming Skull into the previous mix. You can see I'm creating a nice seamless transition from the shaded parts of the horse's body through to the upper areas of muscle, trying to capture and create as much movement as I can. I'm adding more Screaming Skull into the mix for the upper highlights, as with the other stages on Haleth. You can add as much or as little as you want, depending on how bright you want the upper highlights to be in the end. Final glaze using heavily diluted Seraphim Sepia is being applied now. I'm happy with how Haleth's horse is looking. The mane and tail I'm base coating using Rakarth Flesh, applied over several thinner coats to get a nice smooth finish. These are being shaded with Seraphim Sepia, diluted slightly more than a normal shade would be to help coverage. The hair is then carefully being dry brushed with Pallid Witch Flesh. I'm going against the grain of the horse hair to get the best coverage I can, being very careful here as well not to bleed out onto the finished horse or Haleth himself. The entirety of the horse's tabard has been given a uniform base coat using XV88. This will stand out slightly more than the horse tone thankfully, due to that addition of Dryad in the base coat mix earlier. A thorough shade is being applied now using Agrax Earthshade, making sure I get this in all the grooves within the grid patterning. I'm carefully going over the bulk of the tabard now using Balor Brown and picking out each individual segment of the tabard, leaving the shade showing in the recesses. Now this might take some time, but really rewards careful application and patience here with the finished result. I'd keep a reference picture handy as not all these segments will be brown in the end and you want to be as accurate as you can on both sides of the tabard. I'm framing the brown tabard segments now with a 1:1 mix of Balor Brown and Dawn Yellow, again keeping my application tight and controlled to keep my highlights as crisp as I possibly can. Time consuming, yes, but look at how good that horse's tabard looks just from that. The style pattern and the lines between the segments now I'm carefully picking out using corn red, keeping a good point to my brush to make sure I'm as accurate as I possibly can be. Thankfully all these lines are sculpted, so there's no need for daunting freehand. A quick framing highlight is now being applied using Evil Sun Scarlet just to lift them a little bit more alongside the richness of the rest of the browns. The fur trim of the saddle I'm picking out now using Celestra Grey. And highlighting quickly using White Scar. Finally, the saddle itself is getting a coat of Castellan green. Followed by a quick layer using Lauren Forest. The first hero from the long-awaited War of the Rohirrim box is finally finished and ready to fight against Wolf's hordes of hill tribes in defense of Edoras. Rocking his awesome skin fade, resplendent armour, it would take nothing short of an arrow through the neck to stop him. Yeesh. The helmet followed the same recipe for the rest of the armour, with the red being painted the same way as the belt and sword grip. The straps of the horse were painted using Dryad Bark and Gorthor Brown respectively, and the hooves being finished using Skaven Black Dinge and a highlight of Storm Vermin Fur. But these are areas you can adapt however you like. For basing tips, please be sure to head over to my 5-minute bases playlist. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed my first foray into the new armies and legions of Rohan. There is plenty more to come, I promise you. Please remember to like and subscribe to make sure you don't miss out on any of that. Hit the notification bell to make sure you're aware when videos go live. And as always guys, thanks for watching, take care and happy hobbying. Bye guys.